Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. I'm Tolly, aka the Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
I am Richard Washington. I own Tick Talent. We're delighted to sponsor this week's episode. Tolly, who have we got on this week?
This week's episode is with Heather. I loved this week's episode. What did you think of this week's episode?
Well, I was going to say, let's just hear you first. What did you love about this episode so much? Because I've got some strong opinions on this.
Okay. Heather is kick ass. Absolutely kick ass. So she comes from a really kind of like humble beginnings. You know, I think she was the first of her family to go to college and do all these things. And she's just had an amazing career. And what I love about Heather is her approach. She is just like, she just gets stuff done, you know, and she's not scared to fail. She's happy to put herself forward. And yeah, love Heather.
Amazing. So this is one of those episodes that as we were listening back to it and editing it, it was like, that's a clip.
Yep.
Kaya, who edits all these podcasts, was like, it feels like she's talking directly to me.
Yes.
The level of self-analysis and self-awareness that Heather has, and then how she's being able to articulate that into a story and messaging and a philosophy that she can share with people to help them to make a better decision around their career and not do things like live inauthentically, which is one of the major causes of burnout, is you're trying to put on this facade around the way that you need to be, but without showing that vulnerability. So, you know, she talks about, you know, bringing out like the best of you, like the girl in you, rather than trying to be this woman. I think is incredibly powerful. And I just love the way that she articulates things. I think that this is going to be probably one of our most popular episodes of all time, and rightly so, because of the incredible amount of hard work and pain and learning that Heather's gone through to reach this stage of her life where she's able to so clearly talk to the soul of people to help them to achieve an incredible career. So without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Heather, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So I would love for you to introduce yourself to our guests.
Wonderful. So Heather Foidart. I've been in sales and leadership for 20 years this year,
Wow.
so a very long time. Happy to get into my story a little bit later, but originally I'm from Western Canada and I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona.
Amazing. So our first question is usually, what makes you tick?
So for me personally, I think it's really momentum. I also call it my superpower. It's what makes me tick. I'm one of these people who absolutely love personal development. I believe that, you know, we can all get sort of 1% better every single day. And that really drives me. In my career as a professional sales coach and working with women, both who are in sales roles or in leadership roles, I feel really passionately about trying to close that diversity gap that we see, especially in technology. There's lots of stats floating around there, and you know the problem is big, and there's a big gap to close. The most recent stats that I saw from kind of the Women in Sales group here in the U.S. is there's only 30% of women in sales and technology, and then the stats get worse as you go up the ranks. So there's only about 12% of female CROs. And if you look at Fortune 500 companies in the US, there's more CEOs named John than there are women. So it's a big gap. So definitely that's one of the things that really makes me tick, is trying to do my part to help close it.
I think that's so necessary because as I do research for this show, it's probably about 1 in every 10 people that I might come across is a lady. So it's a massive thing. So I'm really grateful that you're doing something like that. So I think that's amazing. You mentioned about the momentum. Was there like a part of your life where you started to notice that, or was that something that's always been there for you?
I think it's something that's always been there, you know, for better or for worse. I was always kind of wired, even when I was young, for achievement. When I was, 6, 7 years old, all my parents' friends would kind of tease me that I was a bit of a bookworm. I always sort of had my nose, inside of a book and kind of was holed away somewhere, or kind of quietly listening off to the corner to, adults' conversations. I always, wanted to grow up quickly. And then from there, I think just, getting the grades in school and getting the promotions at work. I've always just been wired for kind of learning, always just naturally been a very curious person.
I think curiosity is such a superpower. It opens so many doors, so many doors. So I
I
was looking
agree.
through your LinkedIn, and it was just like this amazing raft of things over the last 20 years. So I'd love for you to get into that a little bit and talk us through your career.
Yeah, I'd love to. There's really sort of two distinct phases that I've had in my career, and I've been really fortunate to sort of have a lot of growth. So maybe I'll start about sort of that first major role that I had.
Hmm.
So I started my corporate career, I'd say earlier than most. I had my
Okay.
first, professional corporate job when I was 18 years old.
Right.
I had a number of early roles in retail. I was a barista at a coffee shop,
Mm.
you name it. And so I think all of those experiences combined with, my curiosity, education, sort of
Mm.
landed me that first role as, what's kind of known as a receptionist or a secretary in this
Mm.
tiny company.
Mm.
I was serving for all of about 2 weeks, hated every minute of it. And I had a guest come in during lunchtime,
Mm.
and she was looking for somebody to kind of man her reception desk. And I thought, perfect.
Okay.
I'd love to do anything other than this. I did not understand what she did at the time. And
Yeah.
so I just said, yeah. So look, what do I have to lose? Not much at
Mm.
that time. And
Mm.
so I ended up actually staying with that company for 8 years. It was a
Right.
tiny little trust company, and started out doing everything from payroll to managing the office.
Mm.
Eventually found kind of a love in customer service.
Mm.
I decided that I really had a knack for kind of getting to know people, and I loved solving problems, and I just wanted to make people's days a little bit better. And
Mm.
so I took on my first account management role.
Okay.
And then in that account management role, really found a bit of a love for sales. It occurred to me that there were a lot more problems that we could be solving for our customers, and they trusted us and looked to us
Mm.
for help. And so I sort of created a sales role for myself. This was long before, customer success and account management was known to drive revenue.
Mm.
So it was something kind of new that was happening, and I sort of created this role for myself.
Okay.
After that time, there was an open position. I was in Calgary at the time. There was a position in Vancouver, and it was for the director of business development. Thought I can do this. I've been doing sales for this company. I
Mm.
love it. I would love
Mm.
to do sales formally full time.
Mm.
Didn't get that job.
No.
Even though I had all the experience, I was a person who would run towards problems.
Mm.
I, at that point, had about 4 years of experience with this particular company. I was passed up for somebody, and that person that I was passed up for did have some sales experience, but they came in with, a big list of contacts and people that they knew. But as you come to find out, it's not enough to just know people in
Yeah.
sales. You can have the longest list of contacts in your phone.
Mm.
You could have come from past industries. You can have all
Mm.
the wealthy friends in the world, but that's not what's going to make you successful in sales. And so ultimately, it ended up being one of the best things to happen for my career, because when it didn't work out with that individual, I was the natural top choice, and now in a position of leverage where
Mm.
I was able to negotiate a little bit better for myself.
Amazing.
Yeah, so not
Amazing.
only negotiated a relocation and a
Mm.
raise,
Mm.
and I was able to wipe out all of my student loan and debt, and really just
Wow.
create a new trajectory for myself and my career at the age of 23.
That's amazing. What I'm curious about is that one thing that I found is that sometimes it's harder for women to ask for those extra things or to negotiate as much. How did you know that that was a good thing to do, and where did you get that confidence to do that? Because I feel like that's something that sometimes women can struggle with.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, and I hear it all the time. I think there's a couple things to it. When we look at negotiating, especially when it comes to, new roles or
Mm.
promotions or
Mm.
advocating for ourselves, um, first it starts kind of with that self-confidence and
Mm.
knowing that you deserved it, and you earned it, and
Mm.
you have every right to ask for it, and you're not going to get what you don't ask for.
Mm.
The other part of it too is, when I'm working with a lot of women, really we have a tendency to sometimes fixate on just one aspect of our total compensation package of our career and our careers. So, we
Mm.
look at things just like base salary and title, and that's it. Instead of taking a step back and saying,
Mm.
well, what's really important to me?
Mm.
For me, I love to travel the world. I've been known to, give up money in lieu of more time off throughout my career. And there's also other elements of it as well. So in that particular example, a relocation package was really important to me because I didn't really need for much. I didn't really care about, furniture and physical belongings, but I did want to pay off my student loans. So being able to kind of get that assistance, pay off the loans, and then build a new life for myself was critical. And so sometimes it's taking a step back and thinking, what else is actually important to me, and what do I really care about? And is really a new title going to really change the game for me?
Yeah.
Probably not.
No.
Or is, a few $1,000s a year? Also probably not, but maybe a week's time off, or the ability to maybe negotiate in a higher match on your 401k or RSP, or what have you. So there's other levers that you can pull in that process.
Yeah, I think that's so good, because titles don't really pay the bills. Like it's a nice boost, but it doesn't pay my bills at all. So
absolutely, it's a temporary kind of ego stroke, but then it wears off really quick.
Yeah, it really does. So continue on your story. So you get to Vancouver, and then what happens next?
Yeah, so I ended up staying in that role for about 3-4 years. And for me, I absolutely love sales. I kind of learned the ins and outs. I had a phenomenal mentor. The CEO of the company actually sat literally right next to me and would take me out on sales calls. And I just sort of learned sort of the ins and outs of, how to conduct myself even professionally. I was still very young at this time, how to run a discovery conversation, how to have a professional lunch, how to, advocate for, our initiatives or agendas, or creating kind of that long-term partnership with individuals. So I just learned an incredible amount in that period of time. So after that, I stayed with that company for about 8 years. I think there was a couple of key lessons that I really learned along the way that really helped me kind of get to that point. And one of them is really that there's two kinds of people out there. There's some people who are just in it kind of a little bit for prestige, like we talked about. And then there's other people who are really interested in genuinely solving problems for others. And so I think by being the person that could be depended on and relied upon to help solve some of the challenges the business was facing, and to help really move the business forward, even if sometimes they were kind of unsexy projects or jobs that I would have to take on, is really what kind of put me top of the list when it did come time for, those promotions and additional earnings. And when it came to, advocating for, salary increases, for example.
And so what position were you when you left that company?
So I left there as the director of business development, and had a really hard time leaving this company. I was really felt like I was valued and treated well. It was one of the harder choices that I made along sort of my journey at that point. But I was the first generation of my family to go to college. So I was raised by a single mom, really lived sort of at the poverty line. Money was always really tight in my household. And it was something that I was keenly aware of, that, if I wanted to travel the world and I wanted to have a wonderful life, I was going to need to put myself in a position where I had strong earning potential. I was also, again, curious, loved school. So I always had ambitions to do my master's degree in business and get my MBA. And there was a particular program that I wanted to take that would allow me to work full time and then do that in the evenings over a period of 3 years. And so I came to this inflection point where that became my top priority, and really what I wanted to do for myself. And so I actually took a bit of a pay cut and took on a leadership position. So I left that company. I had a client at the time who I had, was their account manager, and then worked with them on selling some additional products. And they were looking for a director of client services. And like I said, it was a bigger title. It was a leadership role, but it was a big pay cut for me. But it did mean that I would get closer to my goals of achieving that MBA. And so this is another example, actually, where I decided to negotiate a little differently for myself. So instead of negotiating kind of a sign-on package or, fighting for more salary, I shared that goal as being my top priority, and I earned their support. But they also ended up paying for 75% of my MBA program. It was just a huge amount that they're willing to contribute for me, and that investment in kind of me and my career. And that meant everything to me. And so I left somewhere where I was very happy, pursue that dream that I had of going back to school. And, again, being the first person in my family to not just have an undergraduate degree, but to have a master's degree, and really kind of, flip that clan narrative around. And so I actually stayed with that company for 7 years. So I initially joined as the leading the client services team. And then I gradually, again, kind of ran towards solving more problems. So the company was struggling with customer churn. We were struggling with some big operational issues. Sales had slowed down. So, while I was leading service to start, I eventually took on operations. And then I also built up a leadership team underneath me, and then took on sales as well. So eventually kind of landing myself as the VP of sales and service.
So I think something that's really important as well is something like when a company pays for your studies, for example, that's also tax-free, right? So it's worth even more than you would think. Even though you take a bit of a pay cut, the tax also balances out. So I really like the creativity in terms of negotiating different things. It's really, really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And again, sometimes it's just taking a step back and saying, like, what's the most important thing for me right now? And a lot of people will focus on kind of the shiny items, but maybe not the things that will really, advance them more, towards your goals. So this particular company, it was one of my kind of greatest success stories. It was also one of my greatest I guess, personal failures, if you will. So when I joined the company, I was employee number 100. I was really proud of that. It was just a startup, but it's a hard spot to be. It's a lot of turnover. It's a lot of growth. It's a lot of kind of figuring it out as you go. A lot of hours, despite doing my MBA, I was still working 60 plus hours. And the truth of it all is I wasn't taking care of myself. So when I got to that position of VP, I kind of reached my personal top of the mountain, if you will. I got that master's degree. I got the VP title. I eventually negotiated my way up to a big salary. But I was only 29 years old, and I didn't really understand what, balance and health looked like and what that meant for me. And so once I got to the top of my personal mountain, I found myself literally tumbling down that hill and just reaching a point of complete and utter burnout. I mean, I crashed and burned about as hard as you've seen someone crash and burn. I started getting like really bad allergies, and then I got the migraines, and then my immune system wasn't shut down. And I found myself barely able to, kind of operate my day. I was so exhausted, but I was so exhausted, I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't know how to kind of get myself out of this hole and kind of get the help that I needed. And so I think this has really been kind of a key sort of turning point in my career and my journey. And I mean, there's about, 100 different lessons that I can sort of unpack from that period of time alone. But it's really one of my key drivers now. And, as we talked about earlier, both closing that diversity gap, but just also helping, women who are trying to advance in their career and that feel maybe stuck or burnt out, or like they just can't deal with it all. There's too many expectations, and you're being pulled in a million different directions. And certainly I've been there and experienced sort of the worst of it, and had to figure out how to crawl myself out of that hole.
So when you look back at it, would you say that there were warning signs that maybe you missed or ignored, or did it kind of catch you by surprise?
It should caught me by surprise, to be honest with you. I was absolutely insane. I think when I think about it now, I was just surviving off of coffee and protein bars. And I there was a point in time where I gave up Friday night sleep. Like I didn't sleep on Friday nights. I didn't have enough time. So
It's Friday night.
It was the day that I needed to like catch up on everything. So I'd kind of get to the end of my work week and I'd be behind on my schoolwork. And so I was like, well, I'll get through the work week. And then come Friday night, usually clients don't need me. They're out doing their own thing. My team doesn't need me. I think at that point I was managing about 50 people, still balancing our strategic clients. And so my phone was ringing 24/7. And so I'd inevitably like get behind. And so Friday night would come around and I'm like, this is the night. I would just drink coffee and like do all my schoolwork I fell behind on. I'm serious. It was horrible. So like I should have known. I don't know why. Yes. I wish somebody would have staged an intervention, but they didn't. And so be it. And so, it's an interesting thing. I sometimes see on LinkedIn, people talk about, burnout, it's a state of mind, or that. I'm like, it is not a state of mind. In my case, it is complete and utter, people get hospitalized for burnout. This is a very serious issue. We kind of take it so lightly. And I think sometimes it's thrown around a little flippantly. And, I can make jokes about not sleeping on Friday nights, but, there's really serious health consequences to just that burning the candle at both ends. And,
Mm.
to use another metaphor, it's that concept of, not putting your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
It's not asking for help and not setting proper boundaries. And, especially for women, I know men do it too, everybody does it, but, we have a tendency to really overestimate what we can take on and underestimate kind of the amount of energy that's going to take and the toll that it takes on us as well.
Mm. So you mentioned that that's one of the things that you help people in terms of your coaching. So what are some of the things that you work through with them to help them be better prepared or to avoid that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first, a key kind of motto that I live by is there's no self-development without self-awareness. And so a lot of it starts with self-awareness. And I also actually believe self-awareness is one of the critical skills I look for when I've been in hiring positions looking for new salespeople. Self-awareness is really understanding kind of where you are and where you're trying to go, and looking at where you might be taking on too much, maybe where you need to say a few more no's instead of yeses, maybe where you're spreading yourself a little bit too thin. So one of the things I first do when I have a client that comes to me and they're feeling stuck or a little bit burnt out, they're just not really sure what the first path is. We'll go through a couple different exercises to kind of write down how you're spending your time, and then take an analysis and a little bit of an evaluation of the energy drain that has. So if you kind of think about, your iPhone, it's not so much that a task might take 20 minutes, but that 20-minute task could be something you dread and you procrastinate and you go, oh, I don't want to do that. Where there's other tasks, it's 20 minutes. You're like, time flies by, I could do this all day. So it's really looking at sort of how you feel kind of in those moments. And for those tasks that are, they could be both time consuming, but also more importantly, the ones that are a big energy drain, maybe where can we get some more support? And there's different ways that we can get support. Sometimes it's asking for help, or it's delegating, or it's trying to minimize that task. Why is that task there in the first place? And is it still relevant? I can't tell you how many times I'll have somebody come to me, especially leaders, who will say, oh, I spend, 3 hours a week doing such and such a report. And I'm like, well, what's the impact of that report? Like, who's looking at that report? What happens if we stop doing that report? And if that's a big energy suck on your time, where you could be spending that time doing something else. The other side of it too is little, you can have it called like energy vampires. So, I'm sure you have this in your own day-to-day life, people who, oh, can I just pick your brain? Or I have just a quick question. And those quick questions aren't quick questions. Sometimes they're, 30 minutes that just sinks into a period where, you've set aside for your deep work. And now all of a sudden you're prioritizing somebody else's quick question over the deep work that you need to do to advance your goals, your big 3 rocks, your big 3 initiatives that you're trying to move forward.
It's so we do everything. We do every year, we do something called Stop, Start, Continue. So we put everything that we do on a list and we look at it and go, do we stop it? Do we continue? Do we need to start something else? And sometimes we just turn off reports and see, like, does anyone scream or not? Because sometimes no one screams. And it's just like, why am I busting myself to do this report when no one screams?
Absolutely.
So one thing you said was about you look for self-awareness when you're hiring people. So how do you try and identify that in an interview stage or in an assessment center? How can you see self-awareness?
Oh, I love that question. I think it can be asking some questions around maybe what you're like passionate about, or what you're learning right now, or what are you doing outside of work? I think for me, a big red flag is when somebody has no hobbies. Like, it is just work, work, work. There's got to be more. Like, you have to be like, well, what are you working so hard for? And then once all the work is done, then what? Like, and you kind of look a little bit for that kind of behavior. But as it relates to self-awareness, understanding, maybe, let's say, like, totally, what's something that you're working on right now? Why are you working on that? What are you hoping to gain from that? What are you hoping to learn? How are you going to know when you've made progress? So it's maybe understanding kind of some of those levels of questions. And you have to get below the surface, right? I think everybody has kind of micro goals, but it's really breaking it down to say, well, once you achieve that goal, then what? Why are you working on that goal in the first place? I think a lot of, people will have maybe some of these surface level goals, especially in sales. We're a competitive group where, I love the term like coin operated, it's we want to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. Money is freedom and choices and options. But if you ask somebody, well, what happens when you get that big commission check? Like, what does that do for you? And, what is that going to change for you? How is that going to change your life? And, what are you going to do with that money? Like, why is that important? What's enough money? And sometimes that self-awareness can really tell you all you need to know about somebody.
That makes sense. And when I've not interviewed in a lot of places, but I can't really think of having someone ask me things like, okay, what am I doing outside of my day job? Why am I doing those things? So I think that'd be really powerful to better understand if someone really knows why they do what they do, because I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. What makes them tick? Maybe you could ask that.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. You mentioned that was when you stepped a bit more into kind of an official leadership role, and it sounds like you grew from quite a small team to like 50 people by the end. How did you find that journey of becoming like a people leader and having to grow a team? What was that like for you?
It was rough, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It was a rough transition. I loved it, but it was rough. I think, I think what happens is, and I'll just be very candid here, is
Yeah.
that it's so natural where you have somebody who is a top sales performer somewhere. In my case, it was clients, so they had worked with
Yes.
me, like they knew me from kind of the vendor partner angle, as opposed to somebody that had been within their own organization when I joined.
Mm.
But I never really got any, formal leadership training, I would say. It
Yeah.
was very limited. I mean, I was doing my MBA, but that was more around strategy. And
Yeah.
I found for me, I never struggled with that side of it. I always had a really clear sense on strategy. What were our priorities? I never take on more than 3 priorities at once. So, I always know exactly what we're working towards. And I never had a problem kind of communicating that. And I'll say those are my strengths as a leader. I think that came naturally. But what didn't come so naturally is, when I first joined the team, like I said, I reached that VP level when I was 29. I was managing all kinds of people. I mean, I was one of the ladies I was working with who ended up being somebody I just adored and still keep in touch with. But she was 65 and retiring. Like, what did a little
Wow.
29-year-old know about life
Yeah.
at that age? But I learned so much from her. So she was one of my favorite people to manage. But then I also worked with people who were straight out of college, and they were me a few years prior, where maybe they didn't have, professionalism or how to, have productive conversations and how to, be a good teammate and a good team member. So it was a little challenging. The way that I got through it though, is I actually asked for help. So
Okay.
I think that's kind of a key thing. I think vulnerability is something that's become a little bit more mainstream these days. There's some brilliant social scientists and researchers like Brene Brown, for example, that's kind of
Yeah.
paved the way for vulnerability in the workplace that wasn't around at that time. But I did ask for help, and the help that I got was in the form of the CEO that hired me actually agreed to have coffee with me once a month. And that
All
was a
right.
leader that really just had a profound impact on the rest of my life. Like, just a wonderful human, but also just a brilliant CEO that I deeply, deeply respected and admired. And so, I got his support and his attention and that direct line to ask for whether it was resources I needed for my team, or whether I needed support with, maybe a challenging client situation or challenges with my internal peers. And I've always worked in tech. And so I'll just say there's, sometimes people talk about the rift between sales and marketing. My experience was the difference between, kind of the revenue side versus maybe the engineering side. That was always
Okay.
where I experienced the rifts and needed help navigating that, So it was, so I had that direct line with him. And then eventually, actually, it's where I got my first exposure to coaching. They actually offered a career coach. They paid for her as well, which was amazing. And so I got just this brilliant woman who I worked with for about 6 months, who kind of helped me navigate some of the challenges. And a lot of the challenges I had was really kind of around the managerial side sometimes, how to effectively, resolve conflict, and how to, get performance out of maybe some folks who were, underperforming. How to keep high performers engaged and motivated and, advancing as well. So it's some of these topics that you don't necessarily get formal training on, but I knew I needed help, and I wasn't sure that there was going to be a course that I could take. And so, I was very fortunate to get kind of that one-on-one, both sponsorship from the CEO, but also the formalized coaching.
Were you scared at all to ask for help?
It was, yeah. I think being somebody myself who's very competitive and ambitious, it's something that was hard for me when I was younger. Certainly I prided myself on being somebody who was very, I don't say studious, things came very naturally, easily to me in school. It's very fortunate. And so that was a big kind of growth moment for me, where I had to kind of put my own ego in check and say, you don't know everything. How could you? You need help,
Yeah.
and you need, it sounds obvious in hindsight, but that's really hard sometimes, to put your hand up and say, I was already, I think this is one of the things that holds women, and I'm sure many men as well, is we wear these labels like they're true, these things that we know to be true about ourselves. Like for, a recent example for me is, I live in the US now, I'm an immigrant. And so I just put that
Right.
out there now. Like,
Yeah.
I'm an immigrant, I'm a woman leader, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. We lived at the poverty line growing up. Like, what else do you want to know about me? I just find when you kind of wear that on your sleeve and just get it out of the way, you can have open and honest conversations, and you can put your ego aside, and you can ask for help, and you can ask for what you need. And people are inherently good. They want to help you. They want to provide you with what you need. They want you to succeed. And if you believe that, then you need to be comfortable asking for help.
And I think it also puts out connection points. So, for example, like, I was an immigrant as well. So we moved from Nigeria when I was 2 years old. We definitely lived, I would say, probably below the poverty line. So, like, you don't actually know when you're talking to people how many of those kind of connection points that you have with them. So I think it opens you up for connection too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it gives people the opportunity to share their stories. And I think at the end of the day, so many of us just walk through life and we just want to feel seen and heard and understood and, appreciated for who we are. And, I think that's one of the things that I personally really love about coaching now is, like, I get so much out of it. I mean, I give services, but I take way more out of it. Like, I just feel like having that connection and, giving people a safe space to just be themselves and to talk about their challenges and to offer them, support, and just a place to even, like I said, be heard. There's not a lot of space sometimes for these really deep and vulnerable conversations. Where are we supposed to go? I think, you could hire, psychologists. They can deal with some of your past life experiences and your traumas. And, you can go to coworkers, but you can't really be fully open. You can't really be fully vulnerable. And so sometimes you really do just need a safe space to be heard. I know for me, even my social network, my friends are teachers and doctors and nurses. And so for me to come and talk about, the politics of my technology sales, and they're literally dealing with life and death, I feel stupid. Like, I can't go to them. Like, somebody died on my table yesterday. I don't want to hear about your problems, So you need a safe space. Everybody needs a safe space.
So when you were talking about talking to your colleagues, it reminded me, there's this old adage of, it's lonely at the top, it's lonely in leadership. I feel like that's slowly dissipating a bit, but there are still elements of truth to it. How do you think people can navigate that kind of the loneliness of leadership?
I think it's just through exactly what we just talked about. It's through connection and kind of putting yourself out there in kind of whatever format feels sort of safe to you. I love podcasts. I mean, we were talking about this just as we were preparing for the show. And I think it feels really lonely sometimes in our minds. Like, it feels like we're the only ones going through this problem, and we can play all sorts of tricks on ourselves, or we can tell ourselves stories like, oh, this problem doesn't matter, or you make it into this bigger thing than it needs to be. And, really finding connection, finding community is sort of your way out. There's lots of free resources available. You can listen to all kinds of podcasts, including this one, where, you're having very authentic conversations with your audience members, and you're wanting to share the raw and the unfiltered truth of it all. Our careers we spend so much time in our careers, and we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about some of those challenges, and sometimes it's hard for our loved ones to understand. So outside of podcasts, of course, I'm a reader, so you can check out books. And then I think, reaching out for support from peers in your group. If you can get to community meetups in real life, that's amazing. If you can afford it, coaches can be wonderful resources. I feel very, very strongly, of course, about the power of having someone in your corner. There's lots of resources, but certainly you have to, the first step is just kind of realizing that maybe you need help and asking for it and reaching out.
So how did you know that you needed help? Was it feedback that you got, or was it something that you realized on your own? How did you know that you needed the help?
For me, like I said, various points in my career, I've needed different kinds of help. I'll say, I've been no stranger to, I've done, I believe in therapy. I have two coaches right now. I have an executive coach that I work with. I have somebody else who's sort of, I consider like the ultimate coach, the coach's coach. And so I think that there's always room for growth and development and learning. how I personally know kind of when I need help is I would say when I'm a little bit off balance. That's kind of how
Okay.
I know.
Okay.
And the way that I feel off balance is maybe when I wake up in the morning and I'm not really feeling so energized, or maybe I'm like losing, motivation a little bit, or
Mm.
maybe, my self-care starts to slip. I'm really big on self-care and maintaining that. And so
Mm.
when my self-care starts to slip, because both I love it, and I have a good routine, if it starts to slip, I really kind of need to take a step back and say, like, what's going on here? Like, what's
Mm.
happening? I'm a little off balance right now.
Mm.
What am I missing?
Mm. So what's part of your self-care routine?
For me, I try to think through some kind of daily non-negotiables. The things that were it's really rather kind of simple. I've kind of coined it a little bit. It's I've never talked about this with anyone, but I'll just throw it out there. So I kind of call it a little bit of a wellness triathlon.
Okay.
So I try to do something for my mind, my body, and my spirit every day.
Okay.
And by try, I mean I do it every day.
Mm.
There's something, like I said, there's something wrong if I don't do it every day. My mind, that's kind of obvious. For me, I love to journal, I love to read and write. So that's usually kind of what I'll do. Listen to podcasts.
Mm.
For my body, I do something active every day,
Okay.
whether that's kind of lifted weights, yoga.
Mm.
I like to walk a lot as well. I have a dog.
Mm.
And then for my spirit, it's just something fun, something
Mm.
that I love to do, something that kind of lights me up,
Mm.
whatever that might be. That day was always maybe a little different. I really love to cook, for example. So
Okay.
sometimes, making a big meal for my family like makes me feel really good. For my
Mm.
spirit, it's kind of my act of love to them. So
That makes sense. That makes
mhm.
sense. So you'd mentioned about reaching burnout. So it would be great to know, how did you get out of burnout, and then what's happened since then?
Yeah. So, I guess carrying on that story. So the company where I was employee number 100 stayed for 7 years. We actually ended up getting a big acquisition. It was a unicorn story. We had the $1 billion acquisition by Morgan Stanley.
Wow.
And at that time, I had the opportunity to move to the US with that particular company. And for immigration reasons, it was actually a little bit tricky to find my next role. I needed to find somebody to sponsor me. And so I was in this period of just huge uncertainty. I was away from all my family and friends. I was in a new country. I think in hindsight, it probably exasperated my burnout even more as opposed to the blow it all up and start over.
Mm.
But I had this moment of sort of reinvention. And
Okay.
I, kind of said to myself, what I had this mountain in my mind for so long where, I wanted, like I said, I wanted the degree, I wanted the
Mm.
title, I wanted the salary, I wanted
Mm.
all these things that were all very external.
Mm.
So really how I kind of got myself out of it is I really had to do a bit of soul searching and, really kind of look within to figure out, like, why am I doing all of this? Like,
Mm.
what is the point? And I think
Mm.
maybe there's a time where we all kind of come to this reckoning of like, what am I working so hard for? And why am I running myself into the ground? And like, what am I actually trying to get at it? Like, what am I doing? So I
Yeah.
had to just pause it all. I literally blew everything up. I actually moved cities. I realized that my environment had a big impact on my happiness. I was
Mm.
living in Seattle. It was really cloudy. It was really
Yeah.
rainy. It's a fantastic city. If anybody who lives there or hasn't visited, you have to go. But
Mm.
I realized like I need sunshine. Like I
Yep.
don't like to be cold. So for me, that was a big mental health change. So I moved to
Yeah.
Phoenix, one of the sunniest cities in the world, and I'm very, very happy here.
Mm.
So that was a really profound kind of change for me. But then I had to really just evaluate the whole, manager thing. I think I had been taught, through different channels that, Heather, you should lead and you're a natural leader. And I realized it wasn't managing people and climbing a corporate ladder that lit me up. It was actually more helping others. And so
Right.
that's kind of how I found coaching. I kind of made the shift to say, I can't really effectively help others when there's this kind of hard dynamic, if you will, like they didn't choose me. I didn't
Interesting.
necessarily choose them,
Yeah.
and we're trying to make the best of this relationship, but it's not a natural place for coaching to happen. I mean, I
Mm.
praise so many of the servant styles of leadership who are just such phenomenal coaches. I think the world needs more of them, but there's so few of them. And so I
Mm.
realized that I could make the greatest impact
Mm.
by kind of going out on my own. And so I've been coaching sort of independently for a number of years, but I've also held a number of corporate positions throughout. And I found that I'm also kind of, again, my best self being in more of that individual contributor role.
Okay.
I found I was unhappier the further and further away from the customer that
Mm.
I like learning about their business challenges and I
Mm.
like building the relationship and I like making their worlds better and helping them
Mm.
get things done and helping them advance in their career. I think that's the power of sales that people don't realize, that if you really care about your customer and you're not just trying to sell them some software, you can help their careers too. Like you can help them change their worlds and their organizations. And I love that ripple effect. And I just found kind of my sweet spot of what really lights me up. And I didn't realize that, I didn't need to be in, the top of the leadership pyramid to do that. I was actually far more effective being in a seller and an individual contributor capacity. And I found my own growth and personal happiness by doing both. I wanted to coach people and I want to sell. And I realized that was where I was happiest. And I think once I threw out all the, you should do this and you need to advance to this position and, you make a great CEO, but sure, but I wouldn't be happy doing it. It's not really for me. So I think at the end of the day, it's when I really started kind of trusting myself. So after I went through, made the change to my city, I started then looking at my routines. And I think that's really important. I think I talk a lot of my clients about just how we show up for ourselves and learning to create space and time for ourselves. I think as we get more and more demands, either at home, at work, you have kids and spouses, and it becomes easier and easier to put ourselves last. Like we seem to just take the back seat in our own lives. And, it's a thing that you see time and time again. And so we need to learn and give ourselves permission to, be that star of our own show, to really be the main character in our lives and invest into our own well-beings. And so for me, like I said, I do my little wellness triathlon. I spend a lot of time on, eating nutritious foods and prioritizing 8 hours of sleep and drinking, a couple liters of water a day. And I get sunshine on my face every single day. It's doing these little things. It's the 1% that adds up every single day, just to really kind of rebuild. And then I said to myself that I would always just make sure that I would, before making any decision, see, why I'm making that decision and does it feel right for me, or does it feel like something maybe I'm doing to make someone else happy, or maybe that I'm doing because, there's a societal should, or, maybe a parental pressure, or, there's a million reasons we do things we should, but maybe they're not the best for us.
Going back a little bit to what you said about being an individual contributor, how do you balance that with kind of seniority? And because you've had like a VP of sales role and it seems like that's kind of the level that you're at, how do you balance that with being an individual contributor? Because often that comes with some kind of leadership or management.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's interesting you've asked that question. So I get asked that question both in interviews, but anytime I've been in a company, there inevitably has come a point where the leader will come to me and say, hey, why don't you lead the team? Why don't you take over? And I'll just say, I'm good. Like I'm really happy where I am. For me, a lot of that momentum and the growth. So I'm currently, you kind of look at your life in different phases and chapters. And for me, growth kind of in a role looks a little differently because I want to stay in an individual contributor role. I like to work on very strategic sales. For me, I like to work on 7-figure sales. I've closed one 8-figure sale, which I'm very proud of.
Wow.
And I also like international business. So that was actually my major when I studied. And of course, having lived in a couple of countries now, I love to work with international clients because I'm so passionate about travel and culture. Like that's now my growth. And so I think it's really kind of owning, your own journey and what's important to you. Like that's not going to be for everyone. I think a lot of people would look at my career and say, what are you doing? Like, go into leadership. But I think there's also a little secret in that too, is, if you become really great at your craft, especially as a salesperson, you can have infinite earning potential. I love the autonomy that comes with both running my coaching business, but also being, an enterprise seller. I can kind of create my own schedule. I can choose the clients and the projects that I want to work on, and really make a huge impact. Like I never take it lightly if somebody trusts me to be in an enterprise sales role, because I know that my results that I'm delivering means, people stay in their jobs. It means that we can hire more people. It means that maybe we can invest more money in benefits for those people. So I think for me, I really I never take those responsibilities lightly. And I take a lot of joy in that and a lot of satisfaction knowing that I'm a part of other people's success stories, regardless of the season.
I think that's a really inspirational thing, because sometimes it feels like there's almost like a bit of a cap on individual contributors, because if you want to be a VP or be at a certain level, it's almost like you have to take on the people management. So I think it's really interesting that you've found a way, like you said, there's a little secret in that you can actually have your senior position, but you don't have to take on something that you feel might not be the best fit for you. You know, so that's a
Absolutely.
really, really interesting secret.
It is. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of people on LinkedIn kind of talking about how much money you commit. It's always about the money, it's, and I mean, it is about the money, but there's more
Yep.
to it, right? Like you can also be, the other thing that's not talked about, something that's been aspirational for my career is I was reading recently that one of the biggest fears in the world, it's not, snakes or I don't know, hurricanes or whatever. It's actually public speaking. And I realized
Really?
it's something that I absolutely love to do. And I imagine
Okay.
that you love to do it too.
Yeah.
And so that's all of a sudden, I've been reflecting on that lately and thinking, that's something that I aspire to do. And so that could be another career path where, as a top seller, you could be, a thought leader in your space and a thought leader in your industry. And now all of a sudden, you don't have to do any prospecting and cold calling and emails and dancing on videos and everything like this. You could actually get on stage and have
Yes.
people line up to talk to you. So I think that's it. I think we get stuck in these, finite games that
Yes.
and finite like career paths. But if you kind of really tune in and think about what lights you up, what are you excited to do? Like, what do you want to do? You could also write a book. You could start a podcast. There's all kinds of things that you can do to advance in your, career and make a valuable contribution that doesn't include going into leadership roles.
I think it's that thing of your career is a personal thing to you, and you can broadly make your career whatever you want it to be. But I feel like sometimes we have these pathways that are laid out ahead of us and we're expected to go down some of them, but you can do something totally different that no one else has done before. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing.
Absolutely.
So with the coaching, was that something that you had to get training in, or how did you get into that?
Yeah. So I started formally coaching about 5 years ago. There was this great Canadian company called Replays. They were doing kind of sales coaching. And so I got trained through them. But I was actually coaching less on sort of what I do now and more on sales tactics. So
Okay.
it was kind of fun actually. It's like, it's kind of like, you ever thought of the concept of watching like a game tape or a game reel. So
Yes.
salespeople would send me their like discovery calls and I would watch them, give them specific feedback, and then we'd have a coaching session on it.
That's
And
cool.
then and then once they kind of graduated those stages, negotiation was like when I love to do. Like I felt really passionate about that. People are so uncomfortable talking about money, and I just felt like I could help with that. So I really loved that. So I was like, we could talk about money all day. And so that was why I found my little sweet spot there. But then I just felt like I felt like I was making a difference, but I also kind of felt like it was boring. I think sales, we focus too much on the perfect, cold email, the perfect subject line. And it's all these like tiny little nuanced tactics. And that's not really, I think if people, sellers especially, spent more time thinking about how they're showing up and their mindset and maybe limiting beliefs and more about what their customer needs from them and more about, being more of an industry and a thought leader. That's how you can advance your career, not by having the perfect cold emailed subject line. It's so overdone. And so I realized that's where I got the formal training through coaching. And then I kind of went out on my own because I realized what was happening at Replays was interesting because we'd have debriefs with the CROs and talk about the team as a whole. I would typically coach, I coached, for example, the video team who does the video prospecting, and I coached their entire enterprise team. And then I'd get with the CRO and say, these are some of the trends I'm seeing across your team. But inevitably what was happening is they'd be like, can you work with the female sellers more one-on-one? They're struggling with confidence, or they're the best seller on the team, but they don't think they are. They think they're the worst. And there was a lot of these kind of like mindset games going on. And I think that's where I really got the idea, to just go out on my own, choose the people that I want to work with. And I work with kind of both individual contributors and leaders. Typically, people seek out a coach when they're in a period of transition, or they feel stuck, or they're unhappy, or there's a gap between where they are and where they want to go. And so those are usually the times where we'll start working together. Of course, make sure that we're a great fit for one another. But that's really where I found kind of my sweet spot, because again, I think that there's a lot of talk lately about sort of imposter syndrome and
Yes.
how we're showing up. And I at times feel like maybe it's kind of this manufactured thing. I was like, is it that, or you just new at something? Or have you just not done this before? Or do you just need somebody to support you? Like, do you just need somebody to help cheer you on? Or do you actually need some skills? And if so, cool, like we can work on those too. But I find sometimes it's really just that they're on their own. I think and they're doing something new, or they're doing something hard. And, they framed it as being, I can't do this when you can. You just need a little
Don't know how
support
to,
and encouragement. Yeah, you're just learning. Yeah.
So you mentioned about, some of the women within sales were struggling with the confidence and things like that a little bit. So what I'm really curious about is, you were a woman in sales and in tech sales. So how was that journey for you? Were there any challenges that you faced because you're a woman in tech sales?
Yes, tons. So too many, actually. I would say no. I'm teasing. It's yes. So it can be. So I'll say one of the biggest ones I've always kind of struggled with is I've always gotten sort of unsolicited feedback or unsolicited advice about maybe how to do something or the approach to doing it. And I think sometimes because there were so many, men in this role, there's a certain way that they went about it, but that way it didn't work for me. Like I was different. And I think that's wonderful. Like I think there needs to be more diversity in technology. The more diversity you have, not just in terms of, gender or skin color, nationality or whatever, it's really a diversity of experiences and opinions and beliefs and different ways of doing things, and just figuring out a way that we can all support one another. So I've been in a lot of sales team environments, especially the ones that I was a little bit more shorter stinted on, that were very competitive, very zero sum, very I can't help you because that will mean something about my success. And so I think that's been some of the biggest challenges, where I'll come in and I do things a little differently. I smile too much, and I have high energy, and I'm a little bubbly, and I like to listen, and I'm pretty introverted, actually. I'm
Really?
kind of one of the ambivert, a little more introverted myself. And I don't like sports. Like I don't talk about war analogies. I don't do these things. And I'm like, but you can be successful. Like you can just be yourself. Like you don't have to do those things,
Sorry, do people
So
actually use war analogies? Because I don't think I've ever heard one.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I can't. There's so many. I don't know. I too many. There's too many.
Wow.
And I don't know. And so an example of that would be American football, for example. Like I don't watch it. I never have. I mean, football wasn't big in Canada growing up, or more soccer, kind of down like the UK. And so I don't know the rules, or like I need you to quarterback this deal, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like I have no idea. It's like, can you just be more clear as to what that means?
Oh my god.
So this is some of the challenge with women in technology. I'm like, I love music. Can I have a music metaphor? Like, use I don't know, different, something that in my terms that I will understand. No, but in all seriousness, it is just, it's just showing up your whole self. I think there's a lot more talk lately about, just authenticity in sales, and we talked about vulnerability earlier, and just being who you are. I think when I was younger, one of the things that I used to do to fit in is like I would try to be up on what was happening in sports and what was happening in politics, and I'd read the newspaper, and I wanted to appear, like a serious salesperson, and I think the more confidence and comfortable I became, which is who I am and who I'm not, the more success I eventually just continue to find. And I hope, anyone who might listen to this, feels the same, and especially people like you and I, we're immigrants in the countries that we're living in and working in. Like we're different. We have different traditions. We have, different points of view. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's what really strengthens teams.
Definitely, because I feel like growing up, so when I got back home, it was like the Nigerian embassy. It was like a totally different thing to what all my friends were going through. So when I go to my friends' houses and I'd see certain things, I'm just like, this is so different to what I've ever known. But I found that some of those differences have also helped me kind of along my journey to do things in a different way and get different results and things like that. So I think you're so right that diversity of experience is so important, because there's not just one way to do nearly anything,
Absolutely. Yeah. And the reality is their buyers are diverse too, right? Especially in
Yep.
sales and now in leadership too.
Mm.
They have their own things that they're hiding from. I was kind of saying earlier, we have these stories that we wear, we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
they have them too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
connect with that, be human, show up naturally. Yeah.
Exactly.
I saw something on LinkedIn before I joined that absolutely tickled me. It made me laugh so hard. But there's a sales leader, Sam Sales, and she was
Okay.
talking about, she's like, please stop doing kind of the upfront contracts. And that's where, you get to a room and you're like, this is what we're going to cover today. And if you don't agree with this, this is what's going to, and
Yeah.
it's just such a silly, you would never say that in real life. And
No.
it's just such a silly, like we get so wrapped up in these tactics and methodologies and we just
Yeah.
forget, like we're just people talking to
Yeah.
people, selling to
Yeah.
other people and,
Yeah.
just trying to do the right thing.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
be human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you mentioned about, trying to increase the diversity in tech and in sales. So what are some of the things that you're doing to do that?
Yeah. So, well, I think really my focus, just kind of working with women specifically, I'm really trying to help them realize that they deserve a seat at the table. They've earned a seat at the table. And one of the things I hear myself saying, like a recording track, is I think a lot of the women I work with struggle to kind of advocate for themselves and,
Okay.
ask for things, ask for
Yeah.
promotions, ask for that next role, ask for those
Mm.
opportunities.
Mm.
And they also struggle, though, on the flip side of that, with advocating for the things that they've already done and the accomplishments
Mm.
that they've had, and
Mm.
that concept of like managing up within your organization. And so
Mm.
one of the things I feel like I'm constantly saying is that it's not bragging if it's facts, and that's something that women really need to kind of like sink in. Like you
Yeah.
can't assume that people know the
Yeah.
accomplishments you've had and the contributions you've made. You have
Mm.
to share them, and you have to get comfortable communicating that. And so
Mm.
that's one way. I think that's how you can start to kind of close the diversity gap, is when you have more people feeling more confident in their abilities and going and like doing the hard thing, because they can, like, then
Mm.
they can learn and they can grow. And it's a matter of
Mm.
just accepting that everybody starts as a beginner, and the only way that you move forward is through action.
Mm.
You have to start somewhere, and you have to kind of take that next step.
Mm.
There's also a brilliant organization I've been doing some volunteer work with. It's a venture capital firm here in the US called First Round First Capital.
Okay.
And they take volunteers who want to coach people from underrepresented communities. And so they do like a matchmaking program where it runs for 6 weeks, and you don't choose like who you work with. They pair you up with someone, and you go through kind of a 6 week type of coaching program, and they train you how to be a coach as well. So I guess it's another place where if you're interested
Okay.
in coaching, you can learn. But
Mm.
it's a way to give back, and so I've been doing that for a couple of years as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just so important, because I feel like in corporate there's the game that you have to play, and I know for me, for example, like I was taught work
Mhm.
really hard, your work it will speak for you, blah 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 blah, and it's like, yes, work really hard, but you also need to tell people
Yes.
what you've done, because that's part of playing the game. Because there are people who don't work that hard.
Yes.
They're very good at saying the little things that they've done, and they'll get promoted and they'll grow. But like, if you don't know how to play the game, you'll be thinking, but I work harder than that person, but why are they getting promoted over me? It's because you don't know how to play the game.
Yeah, exactly. You're not advocating for yourself. Hey, like I said, I'm Canadian, and so I feel like apologizing and humility is our national, coat of arms. Like, this is what we do. And so it was like,
Yeah.
it's something I had to learn how to do. I was
Yeah.
terrible at this. Like, I didn't want to be a braggart. I didn't want to come across as, anything like this.
Yeah.
Is I'm not sure what I was afraid of, but it's a skill. It's you have to learn how to. One of the things I'll often coach women if they're maybe going into saying something that's high visibility for them. So maybe they're going to
Mm.
like a sales offsite, or maybe they're
Mm.
going to be at a conference where all their leaders and executives are going to be. I have them actually go through an exercise where they write down kind of 3 things that they want to be kind of known for, and like things
Right.
that they've done or delivered recently. And so I
Mm.
actually have them work and practice their sound bites, so they have the opportunity to kind of advocate for themselves and
Love
share
that.
those successes confidently.
Mm.
And it's a really kind of powerful thing to do. I still do it too before I go into an important setting. I think about what are kind of 3 messages that I want to impart, and
Mm.
3 things that I want to share,
Mm.
and getting comfortable telling that story.
Mm. I really like that, because I think sometimes you get a bit caught off guard in those moments. So it's a really good
Mhm.
method. And I think some of the politeness
Mhm.
probably comes from, like, I feel like Canada is like America, but with English politeness. So I feel like that's probably where it comes from.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So just as we close, we're going to do our tick fire questions. So I'll read out some
Okay,
questions,
perfect.
and then you kind of just bat 'em back real quick. So what is the difference between a good leader and a great leader?
Yeah, a great leader is somebody who I think probably themselves has self-awareness and isn't afraid to kind of show who they really are. They lead by example by showing others how to do it.
Perfect. What's your top 3 criteria to hire someone?
Top 3 criteria to hire any role.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it was a sales role, for me, I look for a healthy dose of resilience,
Okay.
resourcefulness,
Mm-hmm.
and grit.
Perfect. What's the best advice that you were ever given?
The best advice is probably for me is action cures fear.
Okay. Love that.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who is starting out in their leadership career?
I would say to not be afraid to ask for help. I think what we were talking about earlier, know that it's a completely different role. You're brand new at it. You've earned it. You deserve to be there. And don't be afraid to ask for help with whatever you need. And people are going to be willing to support you.
Cool. And how do you want to be remembered by the people you've worked with?
I think integrity. At the end of the day, it's my number one currency. It's all I have. So I think being somebody of integrity.
Perfect. That's all of the tick fire questions. Is there anything you would like to say as we finish?
No, I just I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for having me on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. I've loved having you on the show, and I'm a big fan of what you're doing and what you're building. So yeah, all the best with continuing to build that and increasing the diversity in tech. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to What Makes You Tick, and I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. You don't have to have met someone in real life to be mentored by them, right? We've all got favorite sales books, and hopefully this podcast is giving you access to a whole new tribe of mentors who, through their stories and best advice, will help you to achieve a bigger and better career in tech. So if you want to never miss a beat, subscribe now, and then you'll get notified as soon as next week's mentor releases their story. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.